Thank you all for coming tonight. We're very lucky to have Dr. Ibrahim Kareem from Cairo, Egypt with us tonight. Dr. Kareem gives very few public presentations, and we're fortunate that he's here in Asheville for an annual event where he offers new information to advanced students in biogeometry. And I really appreciate the showing tonight of all the local people as well as the people that came from out of town. We at the Vesica Institute here in Asheville, North Carolina, do sponsor biogeometry classes locally. And some of you here went to our foundation and advanced classes that were just a couple of weeks ago, and we'll have more coming up in the spring. What I want to start with tonight, Dr. Kareem has asked me to do a basic introduction to his work that'll give you a sense of who Dr. Kareem is and some of the work that he's accomplished in over 40 years of intensive energetic research and new applications. So here on our first slide is our friend Dr. Kareem. And to start our discussion of Dr. Kareem's work, it's very helpful to start with an understanding that there was an incredible body of energetic research that began in the early 1900s in France. And in this French body of research, they were looking for ways that they could directly test various types of subtle energy qualities that they knew affected living beings, but that could not be detected by gross electromagnetic equipment. Now, the start of this particular French body of research actually came from public discussions by Jesuit-trained French priests, where they were shown the way that they were taught how to test subtle energies using a Jesuit method that was taught to Jesuit missionaries. So they could go to other countries and they could test things such as, is this water drinkable or not? Or what plants are edible? Or what particular plants will be curative for particular types of illnesses? Once that Jesuit information began to be published in France in the early 1900s, we then had an increasing amount of research using these techniques that they called radiesthesia. Radiesthesia means sensitivity to or detection of subtle radiations. And one of the foremost people in the beginning of that field was a man named Louis Turin. Louis Turin was a radio engineer who taught the French military. He knew there were all kinds of invisible waves that surround us all the time that most people have no way to know of their presence. But they affect all living beings, but they cannot be picked up by, once again, gross electromagnetic equipment. So Louis Turin created a system of being able to find the complete spectrum of subtle radiations that affect all living beings. And he hoped that this would become an extension of modern physics. But because they used energetic tools that were outside the range of modern physics, because they used the human energy field as a component of the testing, then it wasn't fully accepted by modern physics, but nonetheless a huge amount of research was done by the French where they could demonstrate that these subtle invisible radiations had very powerful effects on human health and human consciousness. By around 1933, they completed the vibrational spectrum. The vibrational spectrum that they created, they gave the different bands in the spectrum names of colors, but they're not simply colors. Colors are one way that these energy qualities that affect living beings can show up. But it can also show up in other types of what we call in biogeometry quality scales. They can show up as different angles, or as different shapes, or as different sounds, or as different numbers, or as different proportions. They can show up in a variety of different qualitative methods, and describing them in terms of color was just a simple way to describe this whole vibrational spectrum. And with this work, they discovered something called shape-caused waves. Shape-caused waves are the subtle radiations coming from geometric forms that affect living beings. And this is something not understood in modern science or medicine. But Dr. Kareem has been one of the leading people in modern times to demonstrate in scientific and medical research that these geometric forms do have profound effects on health, human energy field, and human consciousness. So some of the research coming out from the French allowed them to use this vibrational spectrum that they had identified to be able to test all types of artifacts from the ancient world. And when you get into these, today, unfortunately fairly rare, French energetic texts from the 1930s and 40s, They go into detail about the particular bands of energy and sub-bands of subtle invisible energies that create very strong effects. So in this particular slide that you see here, this particular researcher was a Russian named Kerner, known to the public as Enel. And what he's demonstrating here, that living in Egypt and testing the Egyptian artifacts and sites actually on location, he was able to use the French system of testing energies and identify specific vibrational qualities that were present within the monuments in Egypt. In this particular case, he identified a particular powerful carrier wave of energy that had already been identified in its totality by French researchers. And this particular carrier wave of energy identified by the French was found to be able to penetrate thicknesses of lead that could not be penetrated by X-rays. And so the French, and then later other researchers like Kerner from Russia, were able to identify the way that these particular vibrational qualities had been engineered into artifacts and sites throughout the ancient world by the initiated ancient builders. In this case, this particular sub-band of energy was at 6 degrees 15 minutes off of center within the geometric form of a pyramid. He called it the omega ray, or the pi ray. And as it turns out, the King's Chamber is not in the exact center of the Great Pyramid, and the 6 degrees 15 minutes deflection allowed this ray within the Great Pyramid to strike directly on the sarcophagus inside the Great Pyramid itself. So this is to give you an idea of the type of research coming out of the French work, where they could identify specific subtle radiations and their effects. Now, what Dr. Kareem did that was very significant is that rather than looking at this complete spectrum of vibrations, which the French had identified, he asked a question that came out of a brilliant insight, a kind of lateral thinking. The French had identified that around the boundary of all objects, these 12 vibrational qualities will be formed in particular ways according to the geometric template of the object. What Dr. Kareem asked, well, that's along the boundary of the object. What is the energy coming from the center of the shape? Because in many esoteric traditions, they talk about the importance of the center. The center is, as Dr. Kareem himself will say, a transcendental gateway beyond space and time. And so he looked at what was the energy coming from the center. So if we have a drawn circle, as those of you who have taken the biogeometry training are aware of, we can actually test energetically the perimeter of the circle, and based on the compass directions, we will find all 12 different bands evenly spaced. But Dr. Kareem then tested the center of the circle, and the center of any drawn circle, or anything where we have formed space into a particular configuration, the center of that will always have 3 specific vibrational components that Dr. Kareem was the first to identify. These 3 vibrational components within the center of everything have the effect of balancing all living energy fields. And so in many of our healing systems today, including in conventional medicine, they use systems of polarity balancing, so that if your heart is overactive, they'll give you a pharmaceutical to sedate it. Or if it is underactive, they'll give you something to activate it. And the same thing is true in many type of esoteric traditions or alternative medicine. They try to push the energy back toward the center, which requires a very specific dose of the energy to try to get it back to center, but not push it off balance the other direction. What Dr. Kareem discovered with this energy that we call the BioGeometry 3, or the BG3, which is the energy that is connected to the center, is that this will not push energy toward a polarity of activation or of sedation, but directly balances, perfectly balances any living energy system. And so this was a great breakthrough in our energetic work, and again, a direct discovery of Dr. Kareem's. We identified all 3 specific vibrational components. With this, you can then test any type of living being, location, or even geometric forms. And with this, you get to the heart of what we often today call sacred geometry, but much of modern sacred geometry is somewhat abstract and intellectual. With Dr. Kareem's work, it becomes a directly applicable science. In the center of the circle, you find the BG3, and in drawn linear forms, you find the BG3 coming in at the perfect center point within the linear form itself. Now, the BG3 will manifest in a whole variety of different ways. Dr. Kareem found that the BG3 is manifested in a variety of different specific shapes. It can be manifested by different specific number patterns. Connecting to the center of any geometric form will give you the BG3. There's aspects related to rotation, specific angles, and even activities that are spiritual in nature, like blessing and prayer. Why, when a person is in spiritual crisis, do particular traditions say to pray without ceasing? Because when a person is doing blessing and prayer, they're connecting to something that creates a strong emanation of this BG3 centering energy in their energy field. That's the healing power of prayer. So the BG3 is a universal principle of connecting to something transcendental. And by connecting to the center, again, it centers everything within the person when we connect to this energy. Now, this is also very important in the architectural work done by Dr. Kareem, because Dr. Kareem is an architect. And when you apply vibrational energies in architecture, you can't apply a lot of polarized energies, because that might affect different people in a harmful way. It could be sedating or activating. But with the BG3 energy, it's the universal donor. It's the energy that connects directly to center and centers all living energy systems. In Dr. Kareem's research, he found that this BG3 energy, the centering energy quality, is found naturally in all chakras of the human body, acupuncture points of the body, cells of the body, and in what's called spiritual power spots in nature. Every major tradition on the planet has what they call local sacred spots or power spots. And if you go to test any of them, they all test with the BG3 energy quality identified by Dr. Kareem. So this is a very important aspect of the work. Sometimes Dr. Kareem will say that one part of biogeometry is the science of creating sacred power spots, because they always have this particular beneficial balancing quality, and using Dr. Kareem's biogeometry system, we can actually create this energy quality in any location. Now, Dr. Kareem is a master of the shape-caused wave. He's a master of understanding the energies that come from geometric forms, as well as from many other things. So part of his work is called work with biosignatures. Biosignatures are linear diagrams that show movements of energy. And many of these biosignatures are linked to movements of energy within the human body and the human energy field. So what you find with this is that when the energy moves into particular locations in the human body, it will circulate in a specific pattern. Now, the circulation of the energy in the body is known to many classical traditions. So, for example, in Chinese medicine, they'll talk about the energy circulations in the body that will give us particular functions within the organ system and other aspects of the body itself. But what has not been identified before Dr. Kareem has found hundreds and hundreds of these specific patterns is what is the exact energy movement pattern inside the human body, inside the organs, and within the general human energy field that creates all the specific effects within all the health-giving principles of the body. And so with the discovery of biosignatures, we have specific geometric forms, originally three-dimensional movements of energy that can then be simplified down to a two-dimensional pattern. And so, for example, for the heart, there are many different energy circulations in the body that create these energetic functions or effects. And so you see here a variety of different biosignatures, originally, once again, three-dimensional, that show the way the energy will circulate within the heart, and every different energy circulation can be shown in this still form of the linear diagram. But when you see it, think of it as a dynamic energy movement pattern. The energy is constantly moving within this pattern, within the body or the organ, to create different functions within the organ. So every different biosignature for the heart, for example, creates a different function of the heart. One might be connected to keeping the beat of the heart. Another might be connected to the filtration of the blood. They all do different things. And again, at this point, Dr. Kareem has found hundreds and hundreds of these over the last 30 or 40 years of intensive research. With this, he is then able to identify different types of ways that energy moves within shapes and what the functions of them are. So, for example, if you look at his remarkable book, which is his first book in English that we have here, which is called Back to a Future for Mankind, he has diagrams like this. This is the shape analysis of the geometric shape of the womb and the woman's body. And this is connected to particular types of biosignature movements, some of which are connected to forms that we find in the ancient world, And this particular one, the shape connected to the form of the female womb and to this type of biosignature movement is actually connected to a kind of anti-gravity effect. It helps the weight of the child to be suspended within the body. So a lot of this is connected to physiological functions, but it can also go into very esoteric levels as well. In previous years, we've asked Dr. Kareem to come and speak on different topics, including his environmental research and on different health aspects of his work. And this year, we asked him to speak on the spiritual and vibrational sciences of Egypt from ancient times into modern times. So he will be getting into more of those esoteric aspects tonight. To give you just a brief overview of some of the successful projects that Dr. Kareem has been a part of, Dr. Kareem began his public exposure in the 1990s with a series of projects at the Egyptian National Research Center. And to make a long story short, they basically asked him to affect the life functions in living beings through pure geometric forms. Now, according to modern scientific and medical theory, it should not be possible for a simple geometric form to affect the life functions in the human body. There is no mechanism for that understood in modern science. But it's something that you find indicated in many classical traditions and is connected to many classical healing systems. So Dr. Kareem was challenged, for example, to have 2 Petri dishes with different fast replicating cell cultures and leave one alone. And in the second cell culture, he was to put a simple geometric form over it or next to it that would kill all of the biological life in the second Petri dish. And as an indicator of the type of person Dr. Kareem is, he says, biogeometry is not for killing, and I'm not going to kill anything. But what I will do is I will put a simple geometric form over this Petri dish, and I will completely paralyze all life activity. I'll put in suspended animation everything in that Petri dish. That's exactly what he did. And this is the report from the National Research Center of Egypt, written by the head of the Department of Microbial Chemistry, indicating the success of the first experiments and that they could not explain how a geometric form could affect life functions to that level. Dr. Kareem then continued to work for them for an extended period of time. He was the head of a research project started at the National Research Center in which he showed them many different fascinating applications of this power of the shape-caused wave to affect living beings. This then led to his participation in the National Hepatitis C research project. And in this particular research project, they were examining all mainstream and alternative methods for helping treat hepatitis C, which was epidemic in North Africa. And in Dr. Kareem's group, he said, I don't need to meet anybody in the group. I'm simply going to find the biosignatures that will be of assistance for the body to strengthen itself in the midst of this particular challenge, because biogeometry doesn't kill anything. And he then put a series of biosignatures first on the particular form that you see at the top left, a very early form of what we have today as the biosignature medallion. And what you see at the top right is the latest version of the biosignature medallion, something that could be worn on the body that has the biosignatures and gives the energy to the energy field. Just from wearing this particular early form of the medallion, Dr. Kareem essentially won the first stage of the Egyptian National Hepatitis C research project. After the end of the first stage, the people wearing his medallions, which were given to 300 persons, had a 90% normalization of their enzyme levels, which was much higher than what came in second best, which was interferon, and had none of the toxic effects of the interferon. The results of this project were announced on Egyptian national television. Also, some people, simply from wearing this particular medallion, reported on national television and showed their blood work that they had complete viral clearance and there was no more Hep C in their blood. Not all people got complete clearance, but everybody improved. When we asked Dr. Kareem how come some improved while others got complete viral clearance, he said because all we did was have them wear these forms on the body. If we wanted to get a more uniform result across everyone, we'd also need to energy balance the energy where they live, the energy balance the location, because that's also something very fundamental and important. Dr. Kareem has then done a huge number of projects, not just with human beings. And Dr. Kareem himself is not a medical doctor. He makes no medical claims. He always allows the medical doctors in the project themselves to announce the results. He's also done projects with animals and with plants. This is one that was done in Egypt with a chick farm. And through creating strong BG3 concentrations within the farm, they could get better growth and much better health in the chickens than they actually got by using growth hormones and antibiotics. They used no antibiotics and no growth hormones. In this particular representative example of one of Dr. Kareem's many plant projects, he did this in association with an agricultural university in Holland. And he created particular types of biogeometrical forms that are illustrated, on this part, bottom left-hand side of the slide. They have particular angles associated with them, or have to do with particular vibrations that are put at a particular angle around the field, what's known as color and object balancing in biogeometry. So they had two groups of apples grown at exactly the same time. One was grown with artificial fertilizer and with pesticides to keep the pest away. The other had no pesticides, no artificial fertilizer, simply created strong BG3 concentrations around the apples. They were then picked at the same time, and after being kept for a month in a heated apartment, you can see that the ones at the bottom left that were conventionally grown are already rotting. But the ones at the bottom right are still fine after a month in a heated apartment. So what Dr. Kareem basically was able to illustrate in this particular project is that by creating strong concentrations of this energy quality, this energy field, around the apples while they were growing, he could get the effect of preserving the apples for a longer time. They would have a higher nutrient count, they would have no pesticide on them, and no artificial fertilizer would be required. Now today we're being told that we need to irradiate our food supply so that the vegetables and fruits will last longer for the grocers, but Dr. Kareem has already demonstrated that you can increase the life force inside of the produce and it'll last for much longer without killing the life force through external radiation. And again, this is just one example of a huge number of projects that Dr. Kareem has done. In another fascinating project that was done off the Red Sea, he was asked by an engineer if there was some way that they could grow crops in salt water. And Dr. Kareem said, I don't know, but I'm willing to try it, see what happens. And so he simply ran the salt water coming from the Red Sea through particular shapes and angles that would concentrate this BG3 energy quality and infuse it into the water. Then that BG3 infused water would be used to water the sweet potatoes that were growing, and the sweet potatoes themselves held within a container that concentrated BG3 around the growing sweet potatoes. So they had sweet potatoes that were grown normally using fresh water, and they grew normally. Those that were given salt water straight from the Red Sea didn't really grow at all, as you would expect. But using salt water straight from the Red Sea that had not had any salt taken out, but simply had added to it this BG3 energy quality, they actually grew as well or better than the ones that were grown using the fresh water. And so this is a remarkable demonstration of what can be done with these types of energetic applications that Dr. Kareem is a real master of. And it indicates that it's possible even potentially to do things like irrigate with salt water. It seems to indicate that these energetic qualities are actually primary over the chemical constituents. In another project that Dr. Kareem did with the Egyptian National Research Center, they were testing, is it possible to use this type of beneficial energy field to protect living beings from toxic radiation, even nuclear radiation? For that, they built a series of different cages. And the cages were built with radioactive materials. And mice were kept within the cages. Those that were kept within the radioactive cages with no other applications all began to develop cancerous tumors, as you would expect. But mice within the exact same type of radioactive cages that simply had some of Dr. Kareem's BG3 generating forms near the cage, like this biogeometry cube, as Dr. Kareem calls it, simply having that in the same area, the mice within these particular cages were healthy with no signs of tumors. So again, this seems to indicate the power of this particular type of vibrational application of these types of energetic fields. Dr. Kareem has also applied this to mainstream work in electromagnetic fields because many people today are becoming highly electrosensitive. We have such a constantly increasing intensity of electromagnetic fields around us. Some people are beginning to become like canaries in a coal mine and they cannot be around strong electromagnetic fields. This is a growing problem. Dr. Kareem did a project in Switzerland in Hamburg, Switzerland, where he was able to neutralize electrostress through the entire town in Switzerland, using various types of non-electronic devices based on geometric shape, like the one that you see him holding here in the bottom illustration. These shapes can be applied at any level, from a particular appliance to a person's entire house, with what Dr. Kareem has developed that he calls the home kit, or they can be applied in large industrial applications, like what we see at the top right, where they can actually be applied to power generating plants themselves.